the rapporteur, Siegfried Mureşan.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Dear colleagues,
Thank you.
today we are putting to vote here in the European Parliament the position of the Parliament for the budget of the European Union for the next 7 years. We are presenting a budget which is sufficient, which is predictable, and which is transparent. Because the reality is the world is changing, and we all have to do more for our security, for our economic strength. We have to do more for our energy independence, for our food security, and for our cyber security. And none of these tasks can be solved by member states individually alone. They are too big for us alone. We can only solve them together, united. And this is why Europe needs a budget to meet our ambitions, our aspirations, and our political priorities. The position of the European Parliament is clear. We believe we cannot do more with less. That is a myth. Whoever wants to weaken Europe should say it and should propose the reduction of the budget. But we, as European Parliament, believe that if Europe has to be strong, it needs the tools, and the budget is an essential tool. Europe can only be strong with a strong budget, and this is why we propose a budget in which the new priorities, security, defence and competitiveness, are well funded, and the traditional priorities which have proven their importance and their viability in time, agriculture, fisheries, regional policy, continue to be funded. There cannot be security without food security. The support to our farmers means millions of jobs in agriculture, means rural development, and means food security. This is why we continue to defend farmers and fishers. What we propose as a budget, as a European Parliament, is predictability to agriculture and to cohesion policy. We reject the idea of weakening these two policies. We want a separate budget to agriculture and cohesion and legal predictability. We also propose to restore the cuts made by the European Commission to fishers, because fishers are also essential for the food security of Europe, and because outermost regions are of a strategic importance for the Union as a whole. We all have to defend them. And this is why we as a Parliament propose a dedicated funding for the outermost regions, the islands far away, because defending them should be a common task for the European Union. We propose to invest more in our competitiveness, in research, innovation. If we do not invest more in research and innovation, we will end up buying technologies from other countries in the future. This is why a clear focus on competitiveness, on research, innovation, on large infrastructure projects like military mobility and energy infrastructure projects, which would make Europe more resilient and stronger. Likewise, we are aware that we can only be safe in Europe if our neighbourhood, if our neighbouring countries, many of them EU candidate countries, are safe and are protected. This is why we are proposing for each candidate country, our neighbours, countries that are defending European values together with us, we are proposing a separate dedicated funding to each candidate country. When it comes to how the budget should be managed, we want transparency, we want democratic control, and that can only be safeguarded with the strong role of the European Parliament. On the size of the budget, the European Commission proposed a budget, and it says, well, we should allocate some of the money to beneficiaries, but also pay back the debt made with Next Generation EU. We believe that paying back debt should not be made at the expense of beneficiaries, at the expense of programs. And we propose to allocate the whole budget as proposed by the European Commission to programs, and to pay back the debt through the introduction of new own resources above and beyond the ceilings of the budget. This allows us to allocate 10% more to those programs and projects which I described and which we all need very much. On the introduction of own resources, we as Parliament have 3 new proposals of sources of revenues for the European Union, which would make our budget more transparent, more predictable and more European. A digital levy, an own resource based on transactions with cryptocurrencies, and an own resource based on online gaming and gambling. Because if we want to fund our priorities properly, to avoid cuts, to pay back debt, and not to increase the contribution of member states significantly, then own resources are unavoidable, particularly the one on digital. Because if the world's largest digital giants are benefiting from our single market, it is fair for them to also contribute something in resources to the budget. We cannot cut funding to our farmers, to our researchers, while the global technological giants enjoy a free ride on Europe's single market. This is what we're proposing as a European Parliament. Many thanks to my co-rapporteur. A strong budget for a strong Europe. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, cher rapporteur.
Thank you very much, Rapporteur. I now have the pleasure of giving the floor to Mr. Tavares.
President, Commissioner Serafin, colleagues, it's been 9 months since the European Commission presented its proposal for the next financial framework. Today we're debating and voting on the Parliament's mandate. We've taken a path to get here, and we know that this multi-annual budget is more than an instrument. It is a roadmap for our priorities. The Union needs the right resources to respond to a rapidly changing geopolitical, economic and social environment. We want more ambition, with at least 1.27% of EU GNI being spent, keeping next-gen EU debt service costs outside the framework. Our approach is responsible and justified. A 10% increase on the Commission's proposal, geared towards the Union's strategic objectives, strengthening cohesion, investing in the future and securing our social model. In our report, we make it clear that we do not agree with amendments leading to the fragmentation of the single market or the renationalisation of the budget. The approach of the NRPPs weakens the policies enshrined in the treaties, leads to less transparency and means that beneficiaries of funds don't enjoy predictability. It jeopardises the European dimension of spending, weakens multi-level governance, challenges the principles of subsidiarity and proportionality. So that's not the way to go. We want the CAP, the CFP, cohesion policy, European Social Fund and a Home Affairs Fund to be maintained and to have their own appropriations. We're in favour of specific funding for the outermost regions. These are key pillars of European solidarity. We want regional and local authorities to be fully involved in the design, implementation and assessment of all programmes. We are in favour of a strengthened European Social Fund with funding dedicated to social objectives, and we want the European Pillar of Social Rights to be fully implemented. We also think that housing should be a cross-programme priority enshrined in the next MFF. Investing in competitiveness without safeguarding traditional polities and vice versa is a false dilemma. Cohesion and competitiveness are two sides of the same coin. We're in favour of allowing the EU to act more in key areas, such as defence and security, research and innovation, green and digital, infrastructure, health, education and culture. All of these are prerequisites if we are going to be able to compete on global markets, to have a stronger EU economy and become more sovereign. To achieve all of this, we have to strengthen programmes such as Horizon Europe, Erasmus Plus and Agora EU. And because the environment and citizens' health are challenges of the present and the future, we want to ensure lasting support to life and E4Health. The EU must assert its role as a global actor. Externally, we have to recognise that there are many geopolitical challenges and the US is withdrawing. We cannot leave a void that others will fill without our values. Today's vote is a vote of confidence in the European project, in our ability to act, protect and build the future of Europe. It is a sign of commitment to a Europe that is not accepting defeat, that advances in unity and that responds to the challenges of our time.
Thank you very much, Rapporteur. I'd like to welcome Commissioner Serafin, and without further ado, I give him the floor.
Honourable members, I would like to thank both rapporteurs, Madam Tavares and Mr. Mureşan, for their important and timely work, and I would like to stress a word, timely, because the urgency to reach an agreement still in 2026 could not be more obvious. We only need to look at the world around us. We have a war on our continent and in the Middle East, spikes in energy prices and trade tensions. We should not expect the years ahead of us to be easier. On the contrary. This is why a timely agreement on the multi-annual financial framework is more important than ever. It is by design, the MFF is by design an anchor of predictability. It provides certainty in an uncertain world. But precisely because the world around us is becoming more unstable, we also need to build in a degree of flexibility. This flexibility was built into the Commission proposal. I can only hope that it will be also in the results of the negotiations, and we will continue to explain the importance of flexibility in the months to come. Honourable members, the Commission has proposed a budget that reflects the scale of our common challenges. We want to invest more in competitiveness, security, and our global role, while preserving strong support for long-standing policies like cohesion and CEP. This House agrees with this ambition, and I see this reflected in your report, also when it comes to the distribution of the increases you are requesting. But we must also be honest. We cannot afford everything. Member States are under significant fiscal pressure. This inevitably means that we have to make choices, and we have to finance those choices responsibly. So the key question is how to match the ambition with resources. The only viable route towards an ambitious budget goes through the adoption of new own resources. I count on the Parliament's continued support here. Our proposal for national and regional partnership plans also is in this logic of flexibility that I have just outlined. The NRPPs are not about weakening cohesion or CP or social objectives. On the contrary, they're about giving Member States and regions the possibility to use the limited resources in the best possible way. Honourable members, let me be clear, my role is to build bridges. The Commission stands ready to act as an honest broker, to work with this House and with the Council to find a common ground and a timely agreement, because this is more than ever the time for European unity. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Commissaire.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Now for the Foreign Affairs Committee, Dan Barner has the floor.
Bugetul multianual.
The multi-annual budget being debated today must support a vision for a truly resilient Europe in the current geopolitical context. We cannot afford to sacrifice cohesion, we cannot afford to sacrifice agriculture, and we cannot afford to fail to support competitiveness. In fact, we cannot afford to allocate too few funds to the next budget. To secure our role as a credible global actor in an increasingly volatile world, an ambitious increase in the Global Europe instrument to 225 billion is necessary. The Parliament's report provides the necessary support for Ukraine. We have a real opportunity through this budget to become the undisputed leader in global development and humanitarian aid for countries in need of support. We need dedicated budget lines for each enlargement candidate country, coupled with strict conditionality that requires a suspension of programs in the event of a deterioration of the rule of law. However, European funds must also have a geopolitical dimension that contributes to Europe's economic security, and under no circumstances should they finance entities whose objectives compete with the EU economy or seek to destabilize its democracy. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup pour la Commission de la Sécurité.
Thank you very much. For the Security and Defence Committee, Ms. Strack-Zimmermann. President, ladies and gentlemen, with this MFF, we're on the right path. Security and defence are being focused on more, and it's high time that this happened. Recent years have shown how vulnerable Europe is and how quickly our situation can change. We must be able to prepare in due time to be able to react decisively to wars. If you rely on others, you become history. We need more flexibility in the budget because it allows us to react more quickly and allows us to act. And the MFF can lay the foundations for that. But that in and of itself is not sufficient. We need a genuine European defence union. And that means commitment from everybody and the drive from everybody to make sure the existing structures can be changed. Security, ladies and gentlemen, is something that cannot be organised solely on national lines. Either we defend the Union together or we fail together, and that is not an option. We cannot rely on others supporting us if problems crop up. We've seen what happened when that happens. Let us go beyond the cross-party divisions and protect a life here. Thank you very much. For the Development Committee, now Niels Goking.
President, colleagues, I really want to thank Mrs. Tavares and Mr. Mureşan for their cooperation in recent times. We see an escalating geopolitical situation. The EU must remain a steadfast and reliable partner, and that's why we have to have true partnerships. 200 billion euros for Global Gateway and through other actions are a good basis for the next 7 years. And it's a way of investing in ourselves too, because as a growing, if we're going to grow, we must tap outside markets. And so we are creating routes in new markets and creating prospects for the rest of the world, including in Africa. So we are growing our own. We see that our own market is shrinking, but we are reducing our dependencies. We need win-wins, and that means not acting against our own interests. The fact that we are giving more money to humanitarian aid shows that we're showing more solidarity. This money needs to be ring-fenced and it should not be politicized.
Commission du contrôle budgétaire.
Thank you very much. For the Budgetary Control Committee, Mr. Protato.
Commissioner, President, to begin with, I need to thank both rapporteurs on their excellent work. In the face of huge challenges that we are facing today, the new budget must be ambitious and directed towards security, growth, and equalizing developmental opportunities. It must be the center of deepening European integration. Therefore, it has to be at 1.27% of GNI, excluding the payback on Next Generation EU. We need a strong budget indeed, and we need a strong negotiating mandate for Siegfried Mureşan so that our position in the trilogue can be taken into account. So I'm calling upon all political groups to support this report. Commissioner, it's us, it's European parliamentarians. We are on the first line on the political battle. We know the expectations of European citizens, we know their problems, we know what they expect from us, politicians, and from the European Union. This is why I call upon you to take into consideration our position, because we are elected by Europeans, and then we elected you, we appointed you to put into practice our policies. So during the trilogue, please take into consideration the position of the European Parliament.
Commission de l'emploi.
Now for the Employment, Social Affairs Committee, Clara Dobrev.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. There are things we do agree in this House, or at least the majority. We need a stronger, a bigger, a more resilient Europe. But there are things we do not agree. How to achieve this? The European right is talking in the last 2 years at least always about simplification, deregulation. They call it competitiveness, but what I see is really that multinationals do not have to care for their workers or for the environment anymore. This is the competitiveness of big business. We Social Democrats say that this is putting profit before people, and we would like to put always people before profit. That's what we are going to agree to. So that's why we are standing very firm on a standalone, reinforced European social fund for quality education, for universal health care, and for the social protection for all. Because, colleagues, this is a choice. Europe that protects or Europe that looks away. And we Social Democrats will not agree to a budget where Europe looks away. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, chers collègues, pour la commission.
Thank you very much. For the Envy Committee, Michaelis Hadjipantela.
Firstly, I would like to congratulate and thank the rapporteurs of this excellent report. Mr. Moresan and Ms. Tavares. Κυρία Πρόεδρε, αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι.
Dear colleagues, it's the first time where in a report for the MFF we recognize fully that the legal owners of land in occupied Cyprus for decades do not have the right to their own property. It's a fundamental right. This is a full infringement of international law by Turkey, which has been in occupation illegally of the northern territories of the Republic of Cyprus. And the responsibilities of Turkey are huge, and no resolution will change anything in the occupying power that is Turkey in Cyprus. Nothing will change that, and we've made the first step, but we need to introduce new legislation. The European Union must make sure that its principles are respected and in practice, support those who have lost their homes for over half a century now. Thank you.
Boris Budka, je donne...
Thank you very much. I can't see Boris Budka, so I'll give the floor on behalf of the Transport Committee to Maria Kyllönen.
Kiitos, arvoisa puhemies. Lämmin kiitos.
Thank you very much, President. Constructive cooperation with Mr. Muresan and Ms. Tavares has been very helpful. We represented the Transport Committee for the multi-annual financial framework for 2028 to 2034, which is important for security, but also for the climate in Europe. It's not just a question of expenditure, it's about genuine investments in the way that the single market works and promoting European resilience. We need a predictable form of funding for trans-European networks, for cross-border projects, for the promotion of mobility. That has to remain front and centre. We need to improve freight traffic as well to make sure that this works across the whole territory of the EU. We need a green transition for transport investments in rail, better transport systems, and an ambitious overall European approach to guarantee competitiveness. We need to make sure that here the internal climate goals and the global goals be respected. We cannot see them as being separate sectors. Transport is the backbone of the European economy. We need to be sustainable and safe for the future of Europe, and investments need to reflect that. Dragos Pidea for the Regi Committee.
President, colleagues, I would like to start by congratulating and thanking our colleagues, Mrs. Tavares and Mr. Siegfried Muresan. The regional development policy is the main instrument for structural investment and the basis of our solidarity. However, today, this tool is put under pressure and risks marginalization. As the president of the Regi Committee, I salute the fact that this report reflects the demands of our committee and has in mind an increase of about 78 billion and a separate line for the Regional Development Fund, because these financing tools have proven a lot of benefits in all European regions, including Romania. Regi supports including these regional policies in the national and regional partnership plans and support in implementing these plans. With regard to decommitment, the proposal to move from N+3 to N+10 months would come with too big pressure on regional authorities. I support the mayors which plead for a modern cohesion policy that is flexible and adapted to the new challenges and that has a robust financial tool. The cohesion policy must remain the main pillar for convergence and for the development of the European regions. Thank you.
Stefano.
Thank you very much. Stefano Bonaccini now.
Di fronte a una proposta di bilancio che
in the face of a budget proposal that is reducing investment and renationalizing European policies and damaging citizens and businesses, we need to show a different pathway forward. And this is something I say as the rapporteur for the Agriculture Committee. Slashing the cap by 20% is unacceptable. Excluding local and regional authorities from managing resources is unacceptable as well. This would mean our farmers were more exposed while they are facing enormous challenges due to the increase in prices for fertilizers and fuel, and then facing also the great challenge of climate change. They need much more if we want to make sure that they've got the right kind of support in the face of inflation. We need to introduce new tools as well against climate and market risks. The value of Europe, Commissioner, is measured by its concrete results in our regions, and that is missing from your proposal. Today, this Parliament is calling for a changing direction, and we need to do this in order to live up to the promise that we made to the citizens that elected us. Thank you.
Thank you. Bert-Jan Ruijsen now for the Fisheries Committee. Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen, the budget means making choices, and those are choices that need to be made. But cutting the fisheries budget by 67%, as the Commission's proposing, obviously is not on, because it wouldn't do justice to the challenges that fisheries is facing at the moment. We need money to carry out fleet modernisation, to have innovative fishing gear, but also for generational renewal. As rapporteur for the Fisheries Committee, I'm pleased, therefore, that the Budget Committee has taken on most of what we suggested, and this means that we're managing to repair the Commission's proposal and getting a decent budget for fisheries of €6.5 billion and a budget of €1.5 billion for international fisheries policies. I would like to ask the rapporteurs to look into the possibilities for support for fisheries coming from the EU facility and also from the European Competitiveness Fund. We all know how important fisheries is for our food security. To make sure that fisheries is future-proofed, we have to make sure we invest, and we need to make sure the budget is commensurate to that challenge. Thank you very much, Helder Sousa Silva for the Cult Committee.
President, Commissioner Serafin, colleagues, defining the next MFF is about choosing what kind of EU we want. In our draft report, the Parliament is in favour of an ambitious but realistic budget. I'm the rapporteur for the opinion for the Cult Committee, and I would like to highlight the increase in funding for youth, education, culture, sport, media, and the defence of EU values. We see a substantial increase for the appropriations given to Erasmus Plus and Agora EU compared to the Commission proposal. These programmes safeguard cultural identity and European values, and they're vital to preserve the European project and for future generations. To conclude, let me thank the rapporteurs, Siegfried Mureşan and Carla Tavares. Congratulations on your excellent and productive work. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, chers collègues.
Thank you very much. Victor Negrescu now for the Legal Affairs Committee.
Stimați raportori și colegi, domnule
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Mr. Commissioner. 890 billion euro for justice. This is the amount we asked for in the new budget. 590 million more than the actual budget of the 890 million. We want to guarantee an independent judiciary, simplify procedures and the EU legislation to make sure everyone has access to justice, including disabled people or people living abroad. We are responsible for the fight against corruption, and we wanted this funding to be used against cross-border crime, drug trafficking and corruption. We want regulation for online gambling and a good digital levy on gambling, and thank you very much for the proposal. So European money can no longer be stolen, and European justice will have all the tools at its disposal to take.
Dear colleagues, for the AFCO committee, Juan Fernando López Aguilar. President, Commissioner, AFCO in the Parliament on the MFF points to the treaties. The Parliament is a budgetary authority. We must be consulted and informed throughout this whole process, this whole budget development cycle. We must also say that we are concerned about the structures underpinning the funds. The CAP, cohesion, regional funds, structural funds. These continue to exist in name only, but the new merging of them into envelopes is not to the liking of the Parliament. Let me also point out the issue of conditionality. Conditionality must be upheld and complied with if you are to access EU funds. And there again I point to our role as a budgetary authority. And the MFF needs to unblock issues that are in gridlock in the Council, including the review of the treaties. Thank you. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Lina Galvez for the FEM Committee.
As Rapporteur of the Women's Rights and Gender Equality Committee, I wish to underline the importance of sending a strong, ambitious and united message on the next MFF, which will, after all, shape not only our parliamentary work in the coming years, but also the European Union itself. It is also vital that we remind ourselves of why we do this, of what are the principles and goals. For these reasons, I am very grateful to the rapporteur that have incorporated many of our key proposals in their opinion. Gender equality, it is not just a right, but a means to nurture a fair society where everybody can achieve their potential, and I also like to remind that it's enshrined in our treaties. To do this, we must crack down on the scourge of gender-based violence and fully support sexual and reproductive health and services, not only with kind words, but with resources. We need to have budgets at all levels, from the MFF itself down to programs, that fully reflect the European Union's values and ambitions, recognizing that budget had never been gender neutral and must be drawn up with anti-discrimination in mind from the very beginning and throughout the process. Specific quantifiable targets are needed, along with comparable, robust and gender desegregated data. Finally, we need a fully support right-based organizations, including those supporting women's rights. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Carlo Ressler.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Carlo.
Dear colleagues, today we are not voting only on abstract figures, but we are voting about the direction of Europe in the upcoming decade. In the world marked by challenges, technological delays in Europe and economic pressures, one thing is clear. Europe cannot and will not be able to fulfill its ambitions without a realistic budget. This is why Parliament must be clear. We want a stronger Europe and investments that follow this. The financial framework that is not burdened by the repayment of loans and the increase of 10% of resources. We want new own resources to secure stable financing without additional burdens to European economy and citizens. These resources must be used and directed towards where it is needed the most: security, territorial development, and competitiveness. NRPPs will manage almost the half of the European budget, and this is why they must respond to real needs of European citizens and regions with predictability. the countries that develop faster through cohesion funds, and there are many of them among us, including my country, Croatia, shows how important investments in cohesion are healthy and necessary. Cohesion is also the agriculture as the basis of a European project. They must remain strong and clearly defined, but also with new investments in security, migration management and competitiveness. With less administrative burden that suffocates the beneficiaries, and resources must be directed towards projects and reforms. We must be honest about one thing, and this is that €1, no matter the creativity, can be spent only once. If we want a more secure and more competitive Europe, we must be ready to finance it.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Sandra Gomez Lopez.
En esta Cámara hay algo.
Here, we mostly agree on ambition. Ambition to invest more, to respond to crises, to protect citizens, and to turn the EU into a stronger union. But the reality is that there is an uncomfortable question that we're sidestepping. How are we going to foot the bill? And thus, it doesn't add up anymore. The Commission and the governments like more funds, programmes, and more EU investment. However, they don't like to talk about income, own resources, and true funding. But the reality is crystal clear. Without own resources, there's no autonomy. Without autonomy, there is not a strong union. Since 2020, the member states' governments have blocked any progress in Council. But we cannot continue on this path. We need an important step forward. We, in this Parliament, are linking the approval of the MFF to the existence of new own resources. We can't have budgets without deciding on how they're funded. We need more ambition, not more money just to pay off Next Gen EU. We need to be able to pay for new programmes without cutting cohesion and agriculture. And if anything falls, then we must replace it with something else. What we need to have is to have courage, political courage, to apply what we want to. And we say to the Council and Commission, we can't have a long-term budget without resources to underpin it. Europe cannot be more if we are not willing to pay for more. Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Mr. Bardella.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le Commissaire.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, at a time when European families are counting every penny, we are examining today what ought to be the most transparent political text, the budget of the EU for the next 7 years. Each taxpayer should be able to follow the exchanges that we have today, because this has got to do with their taxes and how their money is going to be used. It's got to do with their future at the heart of it. Because the EU is not just a matter of figures, it's a vision, and it is about what lies behind a political project. And that is of some concern today. Due to the method, how can one avoid being alarmed when there are these methods to provide the EU with a budget before the French elections, which are set to take place next spring, going against the usual logic of the timeline, and that is to force the hand of the upcoming President of the Republic of France. And it's of concern because of the sums that we're talking about, almost €2 trillion, a huge increase. This is throwing caution to the wind, and it's unprecedented. There's a really simple question that needs to be asked here. Who's going to be losing out? For France alone, this would mean contributing around €20 billion. And who's going to be missing out on that money? Well, French taxpayers. You talk about new own resources. Put plainly, this means new EU taxes on e-waste, yet another tax levied on tobacco, on big European companies. You talk about massively increasing foreign spending as well, about distributing ever more money to third countries, to pump more funding into programs that are not really useful. All of this to say that you have yet to prove that you are being effective in your spending, but you continue to spend more money. Is this the idea that's been come up with by President von der Leyen, President of the European Right, or is it the work of Pedro Sanchez? We see things differently. We want to slash useless spending. We want to stop spending money that we need at home elsewhere. We want to ring-fence funds for farmers and thereby protect them, to put a stop to illegal immigration rather than encouraging it. That is what will make European nations stronger. We want to reduce spending pumped into the EU by European nations, and we will do everything it takes to live up to this democratic challenge.
Suivant, Bogdan.
The next speaker is Mr. Jonker.
President, Commissioner, we are worried by the situation the European Union is in at the moment. We believe that the document that we're discussing is not a strategy, but it's a list of our wishful thinking projects. Let's ask us a simple question: what works and what doesn't? Where competences are blocked, and what should be kept at the European level and what should remain at the level of member states? There's too little being said about savings, totally different to 7 years ago. We talk too little of savings, and this is expected by our voters so that we can show that the EU can save money as well. We're also worried by the new own resources. This means further fiscalization of the EU. Have we had the mandate to do that? No. So a tax union is being implemented in this document. We don't like it. Also, European added value is extended, and the EU budget should focus on what we do together: security, agriculture, competitiveness, support to regions, infrastructure. There's not enough on those things in the document. Finally, before we grow our global level of ambition, let's first take care of fundamental things: safe borders, the economy, technology, cohesion. So less illusion, more discipline, less centralization, more subsidiarity. The budget should remain a tool for investments and not a mechanism for growing competences and spending beyond control. Please tell me, Commissioner, where is the money for the European Globalization Adjustment Fund? Unfortunately, companies have been falling in Europe. Every month we are passing bills to bring assistance to countries, and it's a positive question, an honest question, because I would like to share that with my voters. Thank you.
Fabienne Keller.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Ms. Keller. President, Commissioner, Piotr, colleagues. In our report, we have a strong, responsible and ambitious and realistic position. Our citizens want Europe to do more, not less. In every single area, we need more funding. That's why we must invest for our strategic autonomy in key sectors, to support industry, youth, research, health, culture, the environmental transition. We must grapple with tomorrow's challenges, and we must do that at European level. The budget is also a way to protect our values. I, together with my group Renew, welcome the fact that we have a clear Parliament position on the protection of the rule of law in the budget and for the budget. In fact, the EU budget is also a budget of solidarity and must stay that way. The Parliament can only say yea or nay to this, but we have a clear position. We won't approve the next multi-annual financial framework if the next MFF doesn't have new own resources. And there, we agree with your position, Commissioner. We need true European income to finance our mission. Let's have a responsible, realistic and ambitious budget to serve the interests of the European people. Thank you. Thank you very much, dear colleague. The next speaker is Ms. Reintke.
Dear colleagues, member states come up over and over again with new tasks for Europe. Solve for us the challenges of migration. Go ahead, make digitalization happen. By the way, the best tool to actually cut bureaucracy, I would say. Or, organize our defense spending. Can Europe please deliver here? Can Europe please deliver there? But when we are then actually talking about the budget, the member states want less money and more renationalization of decision-making power. When, colleagues, it is so obvious that the opposite is needed. We need more European money and we need to spend it on common aims instead of hobby horses of national governments. There is a multitude of examples that show that. In defense spending, for example, we are still too fragmented. We spend a lot of money. We spend it in a completely inefficient way and very often not even properly coordinated amongst member states. If we do not need one thing, it is more of this. So yes, simpler rules, but without losing sight of our common tasks and the European direction that we want this budget to take. Und liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen,
and ladies and gentlemen, we can see games being played and we need to let the scales fall from their eyes. Chancellor's friend Ursula von der Leyen's been given a letter to set out all sorts of abstruse conditionality points for simplification which aren't in the power of the Commission. I really didn't believe it. A CDU approach that is really serving the interests of Donald Trump is not what we need now. We need a stronger European Union with a stronger European budget. To be frank, we're at a juncture where this should be clear. European citizens have never asked more for a greater cohesion in Europe. Now we can show this with a future-proof budget that will help us do that.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Mr. Oliveira. President, Commissioner Serafin, the Commission proposal for the next MFF was a poor starting point. This report just deals with the worst aspects, but the political priorities in the MFF proposal are all about militarization. It doesn't deal with economic and territorial asymmetries. There will be a concentration of power in the Commission so that the Commission can coerce the Member States, and then there will be new own resources which will strangle the national budgets. More money for war, but less money to deal with poverty, build schools and houses. Multinationals will see that they'll have even more money, but SMEs, fishermen and fisherwomen, farmers will have less money. The only time that the Commission simplifies is for itself. There's never simplification for the end beneficiaries of the MFF. Cohesion, agriculture and fisheries are losing out in this budget. Science, technology, industrial production, steelmaking, airports. Only will these be funded if it's for military purposes. There's very little for the member states and for the people, though. And every single region, every single territory will be controlled and checked up on by the Commission imposing what it wants, thanks to the European semester and its recommendations. So if you want money, then you have to follow the orders of the Commission. This is not just wrong distribution of money, but it is done based on the wrong goals. This is so unfair, unjust distribution of funds. You will harm those who are least developed, and you will help those who are already most developed. And it also will lead to further control by the European institutions. Thank you very much, and I give the floor to Mr. Jungblut.
President, This interim report on the multi-annual financial framework from 2028 to 2034 is really the hammer. It's such an unexpected turn. We're looking at a more centralised, bigger budget. Obviously, the framework's going to be more expensive. 2021 to 2027, the volume for this was about 1,074 billion euros. If you take that as a reference, now we're looking at around 2 trillion. We're looking almost doubling that. It's an explosion of the financial framework. What is being sold as a necessity is hardly justified. There should be more money according to the principle, write a list, Christmas tree. And then you try and define this and justify it with future-proofing and resilience. And there's one word that's not mentioned enough, and that is savings. So it's hardly surprising that the Parliament takes the reference size for this as 1.27% of the gross national income of all member states and is asking own resources. This, in the end, is actually an increase. It's a quota for each state. The income of the EU is going to grow more than the income of its citizens. That's socialism down to a T. The idea that the growth of the budget should be more than the growth of the income of its individual citizens runs counter to all ideas. We know that across Europe, citizens are being forced to save because of crises and wars, misadministration, indebtedness in states that have come about because of policies that are irresponsible. So how should you be raising EU budgets when you're cutting income of citizens? You can't communicate that. What the EU needs is communication to reduce their expenditure. We need to make sure that you can also give up on certain things if you're expecting others to do that. I think we need to level criticism at what's in this budget as well. We're seeing that we're banning farmers of deciding on their own expenditure models. Fishers are being pitted against farmers, employers against employees. And that is basically the EU trying to put a smokescreen in front of what they're actually doing. National responsibility is not a risk, it's a fundamental principle of democracy. The member states know best where resources are needed most and where they need to take decisions. The new MFF is firing a shot across the taxpayers. You're talking about increase in own resources and flexibility. In practice, what it means is implicit increase of tax to the detriment of citizens and companies, more bureaucracy. If we're looking at own resources being increased by 60 billion per year, then this isn't a will to reform. When it comes down to it, this is an additional burden, another burden for citizens and companies. The planned expansion of agencies in infrastructure in institutions is going in the wrong direction. Instead of winding them down, they're trying to inflate them. Instead of decentralizing, Brussels is trying to arrogate more powers unto itself. We need the opposite of this. We need a slimline, transparent financial plan that will reduce the burden on citizens. Less money for centralization, less money for EU administration, more responsibility for sovereign states of Europe.
Merci. Danuše.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is MEP Nerudova.
Dear Chair, dear Commissioner, dear colleagues, we often hear from a finance minister that opposing a stronger EU budget is about protecting taxpayers. But is it really? Take Czechia. Our finance minister rejects a higher EU budget and new resources in the name of fiscal discipline. Yet at home, she disguises real spending by using special exceptions to budgetary rules as if they were normal. Her campaign promises are funded through accounting tricks while debt continues to rise. So let's be honest. This is not about protecting taxpayers. This is about lying to them. I would rather contribute at the European level through investments in competitiveness, innovation, and programs like Erasmus+. In short, in our future. I support a strong EU budget, and this is why I support the very good MFF report put forward by Siegfried Mureşan and Carla Tavares. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, cher collègue. Jean-Marc Germain.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to Mr. Germain.
Chers collègues, ce jour...
Colleagues, this date will go down in history in the building of the European Union. Our Parliament is about to do away with the ridiculous notion that the EU budget should be stuck at 1% GNP. With the budget that we have set out, we are breaking the glass ceiling that has been placed before us. And furthermore, Mr. Bardella, I would defy anyone to say that our priorities are not vital. Housing, when families are spending over 50% of income on their housing. Climate policy. Digital, at a time when algorithms are taking control of our lives. Space, when we're supposed to rely on Starlink for military intelligence in Ukraine. And defence, when Trump is turning his back on NATO. I've said it before, not taking action in these areas would be a grave political and moral mistake. We cannot build the Europe of tomorrow while we sacrifice its social soul. We need to make sure that there is the right kind of funding for cohesion policy and the cap. We propose that the increase in loans not be funded by the member states, but by new own resources like taxing cryptocurrency, online betting, or digital. And I'll just finish on this point, President. I just want to congratulate Carla and Siegfried on this excellent compromise. It now falls to the heads of state and government to move forward. Europe and Europeans have their eyes on you. History has its eyes on you. You must live up to the challenge.
Kinga Gál.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Kinga Gál.
A következő 7 éves költségvetés kritikája rész.
Colleagues, over the next 7-year budgets, there will be many problems with this budget. We, as patriots, are not against the EU, but we are in favour of an EU that better serves the interests of its citizens. Citizens and the electorate expect the European institutions and governments to preserve peace and security. But this is not guaranteed by the Commission's proposal in its draft. Instead, billions of euros would go to further fund Ukraine, but agricultural subsidies, cohesion policy, it would be reduced by 20%. So, this will backfire on ourselves. These are ideologically based rule of law conditions. And this will further strengthen the power of the Commission vis-à-vis the Member States. That is what von der Leyen has said. But it is our role to determine the future of the Member States. We are against this liberal proposal. We, as the patriots, will continue to stand up for the sovereignty of the Member States and for farmers and others. And we will continue to stand up for common sense. For us, the interests of the citizens are what matter the most. Thank you very much, and I give the floor to Mr. Van Overtveld.
President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, looking at this MFF, let's not be blind to the essential challenge, and that's the structure of the European budget is outdated. We need to allow greater space for choices for the future, and we need to make sure that we do that to deal with the challenges, meet them head on. The current the future MFF should be a turning point. It is an opportunity to finally future-proof the budget. And for me, that means more investments in areas where Europe is effective and is providing clear added value. Research, innovation, cross-border infrastructure, and shifting resources to the core tasks of a union which has to become more politically mature. Defence, migration, security. More investments in pan-European projects which will go beyond the wish list of member states. Strengthen interconnectivity of our energy networks, for example, and Europe-wide cybersecurity. A strong budget is not just about having more money, it's about allocating the existing resources better. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, cher collègue. Steenbos.
Thank you. The next speaker is Steenbos.
Chairman, Commissioner, dear colleagues, no more free lunch, or we will be the dinner. I'll continue in Danish. Vi kan ikke længere tage for...
We can no longer take it for granted that someone else will come and solve our problems. We can no longer be dependent on others. Nor should we refrain from doing it ourselves. We know how to do it. There's something unique about Europe. We have some of the most brilliant minds and best societies. It is our responsibility as politicians to support them. Give them the possibility to succeed together. That requires investments, large investments in energy independence, competitiveness, health, and most of all, in security and defense. It's all interconnected. It will only work if we encompass everything. The Union has to be able to do much more on its own, and in this new budget, we can show that we're ready.
Merci beaucoup. Rasmus Nordqvist.
Thank you. The next speaker is Rasmus Nordqvist.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. The report we are voting on today sets a clear frame for the coming negotiations on the long-term budget. We are setting the ground plan, the architecture, which is partly new, partly adjustments, as we are preparing for the future. And we're doing so knowing that we already are facing several challenges, if not crises. The war in Ukraine, ongoing war in the Middle East, challenges to energy security, and not least, climate and biodiversity crisis which grows day by day. And this is only what we know until now. The budget is more than numbers. The budget is about priorities, and we have many. We have traditional priorities, we have additional, and not least, we have totally new ones we don't even know yet. A main concern from my group is, of course, the climate and biodiversity crisis, and I'm content to know that today we adapt a text which maintains this a priority, both overall and in sectoral funds. This is also why I'm satisfied that we have earmarked funding for live action. Not as much as I wanted, not exactly how I wanted, but we have it in important headings, not least in the competitiveness funds, which shows directly that this is the direction we want to go also when it comes to competitiveness. I want to thank the co-rapporteurs and not least as well my colleague Fabienne Keller for the collaboration. I think today we can be proud pro-Europeans behind this report. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, cher Rasmus.
Thank you. The next speaker is Lee Anderson.
Chair, a civil servant from a ministry in one member state stated the problems with the MFF very clearly to me. He said, how are we going to defend social spending when it's all lumped together under the NRPPs? Are we going to ask the disabled, the poor children and the elderly to take to the streets? This is why EMPL has called for a separate standalone ESF Plus with dedicated funding. This is reflected in the interim report, which includes the same call. This must mean a separate fund under the ESF Plus regulation with separate reinforced funding. The question is, what happens now? Will this House disregard the social funding because the voices of people with disabilities, children and the elderly are not as loud as those demanding the separation of agricultural and cohesion funds? It is now up to every group in this Parliament to show whether you are really committed to social Europe.
Merci beaucoup, cher collègue. Thomas.
Thank you. The next speaker is Thomas Geisel.
Herr Präsident, liebe Kollegen.
President, colleagues, when Madame von der Leyen presented the draft MFF, many of you were outraged. Rightly so. Because these plans, in particular the concept of NRPPs, it boils down to this. The Parliament is largely sidelined from the distribution and control of the EU budget. Negotiations with the Commission have changed very little, as the Court of Auditors recently confirmed. And it's even more surprising that you want to give the Commission even more money than it originally asked for. Europe doesn't create value by channeling more money through Brussels. We shouldn't just give von der Leyen a bag full of money so that she can co-govern the member states. What Europe needs are clear and simple rules for cohesion policy, for the CAP and for the protection of our borders. That's our job as MEPs. We are not contractors of the Commission, much less they're useful idiots.
Orateur suivant.
Thank you. The next speaker is Isabel Benjumea.
Gracias, señor presidente, señor comisario.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, from the very first day when the upcoming MFF began to be debated, the European People's Party was very clear on its position. And that's a position that we have firmly defended, and that is clearly reflected today in the final agreement. We cannot accept the model, the failed model of next generation repayment being included in the budget. Nor can we accept cutbacks on key programs or centralization of management, leaving regions out of the picture. That is why we have committed to maintain the independence and funding to the CAP, cohesion policy and our common fisheries policy as set out in this text. We commit to bolstering spending on defence, on the security of our borders in the face of illegal immigration, and we will continue to give unconditional support to Ukraine as set out once again in this agreement. We commit too to supporting European businesses, strengthening competitiveness, research, innovation and educational excellence, as is set out in this agreement via the Competitiveness Fund, Erasmus Plus and Horizon Europe. And all of this we will continue to do, focusing on budget responsibility, regulatory simplification, and getting rid of unnecessary red tape to support SMEs and end beneficiaries. We have been consistent. We have defended what we said we would, and we have led the position in this House. Now we turn to the Commission and the Council, hoping that they too will step up. Thank you.
Cher collègue.
Thank you. The next speaker is Marcos Rossempere.
Merci, President. Commissario.
Commissioner, does it make sense to talk about a stronger Europe if we weaken the policies that keep it upright? There are few policies that better represent the link between the EU and the citizens than cohesion policy. Let's not fall in the trap. Some just want us to be a number of member states added up together. But no. Here on this budget, we have to decide what side we're on. Cohesion leads to less inequality. It leads to affordable housing being built. It leads to opportunities in rural areas. And it helps with the just and fair green transition. So that's why we want earmarked funds for cohesion. Cohesion cannot be subordinated to other policy areas. We're not just talking about resources here. We're talking about Europe's ability to help citizens in their day-to-day lives. If we weaken cohesion policy, it is tantamount to weakening Europe. But if we strengthen it, we will strengthen the European project where it matters most, in each region and in each municipality.
Cher Marcos, Julia Sanchez.
Thank you. The next speaker is Julien Sanchez.
Sur 80...
Out of 95 amendments tabled to this interim report on the MFF 2028 to 2034, a large part of them, once again, comes from our Patriots from Europe group. We've been working on this and trying to raise awareness. We'll have to vote against this text nonetheless because it's basing itself on things that citizens don't want anymore. More debt, more centralisation, more own resources, i.e. tax, more constraints imposed from above. A multi-annual financial framework where Brussels is deciding more, where citizens are paying more. And basically, we're just building a less transparent machinery working against the interests of citizens and common debt. Many people want to see more longer-reaching financing because if we don't do that, it's going to be our children and children's children who have to pay. These policies are aimed at striking at those who don't agree politically in the capitals and weakening our purchasing power. And we can see that this budget for 2028-2034 is going against the decisions that France will be taking in 2027 on the direction their country wants to take. So we're refusing more centralisation, more debt, and this dangerous logic as well.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Brzezinski.
Ladies and gentlemen, the European Union needs a reform. We need change. We are losing in global competition against China and the US. And what is your reply to the challenges? More of the same. No reforms, no changes, and no vision for the future. Polish companies, European companies are suffering from red tape. What's your reply? More red tape. We are suffering from taxes and regulations stopping new technologies. Your reply is more European taxes. In that way, you cannot enter a new decade of development. You're lacking vision, you're lacking understanding of Europeans. The Polish people are on tight budgets, and you want to transfer billions from one end to the other without ever checking if it's effective. This proposal is an opportunity missed, and it's really pitiful that it's happening under the auspices of a Polish commissioner.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Streit.
President, Commissioner, colleagues. Not everything that glitters is gold, and that applies to the MFF too. It's not just about spending more. We must use taxpayers' money better. 1, look at what the Court of Auditors has said. We must save. 2, we must establish priorities. Energy, investment, rural. These are 3 priorities for me. So cuts to the CAP can only happen, don't need to happen if we shift things around in a clever manner. Then we need to have overall security, not just energy security. But if the 12 stars on the European flag are going to continue to glitter over our skies, then we must not just spend more. We must have more budgetary discipline. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Rasmus Andres.
Thank you. The next speaker is Rasmus Andresen.
Thank you very much. In the budget debate, we need to be honest. Many people in the European Union are not doing well. They're worried about their jobs. They have health problems. Or maybe they have problems with paying their bills for heating or rent. And we need to make sure that we can provide answers, and that's why this MFF is so important. So we were shocked to see the plans of the Commission where there's less social policy set out, where the social fund is being attacked, and where no responses are given for payable and affordable rents. So we've managed in the current proposed report to concentrate on some social answers and responses to provide for everyone in Europe. And that's made this report stronger, and we'll support it. But we can't rest on our laurels. We need to look at where the money comes from. And we think that's something that the big tech companies should be paying more. They are making a lot of money in Europe and paying too little tax. We have an opportunity now to do something about this, and our clear demands to the Council, Chancellor Merz especially, don't come up with clever words. Let's be constructive in working with Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Valentina Palmisano.
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen. Small hospitals are closing, bills can't be paid, wars in our frontiers. With the multi-annual financial framework, we have an opportunity to address this on one occasion only, but the response of the European Parliament cannot be trying to put out a fire with a glass of water. Only own resources on taxing extra profits and windfall profits of tech giants can do this. We don't want double bookkeeping and fancy gymnastics in the books to do this. We need to have diplomacy as well, because citizens want peace. They don't want to see the defence budget multiplied by 5 times. We need to look at restructuring, but what Giorgia Meloni and Fratelli d'Italia, the Brothers of Italy, is saying about the stability pact that you signed on, let's talk about that. Let's talk about austerity. Let's talk about the arms that we have at our disposal. So we need to have a stronger Europe and a Europe stronger, closer to its citizens.
Thank you. The next speaker is Andrei Dostal.
Ladies and gentlemen, there is no such thing as European money. There is only money that the EU takes from member states, consumers and businesses. The EU has taken on a massive debt through Next Generation EU using an accounting trick that violates the principle of a balanced budget. It'll still be paying it off after most of us are dead. The budget has ballooned, it'll continue to grow, and to cover it, the EU wants to introduce its own taxes on emissions permits, carbon tariffs, tobacco tax on citizens, corporate tax on businesses, will pay through fees on electronic waste and plastics. The EU was supposed to be an international organization that promotes the prosperity of its member state. Instead, it is becoming a superstate that imposes more taxes, internally through excessive regulation, externally through inept diplomacy. In a crisis, we need the opposite. We need to streamline the Union, abolish emission permits, stop tormenting the energy sector, the automotive industry, farmers, and save on bureaucrats. The budget should be halved. It should focus exclusively on managing the internal market and economic diplomacy. I don't see any of that in the proposal, and I will vote against.
Thank you. The next speaker is Andrzej Halicki.
Ladies and gentlemen, either the EU will be stronger, more effective with less bureaucracy, acting faster, being able to spend money on most important projects, those that are most expected by citizens and those that counteract threats, or we will no longer be needed. Therefore, the new financial perspective must be a response of the expectation and threats of today. It must be a strong reinforcement for our defense, for defending external borders, and for those actions that are most needed and most expected as priorities. This is the expectation of citizens. Security is job one, and Europe's security is still number one. Of course, we must have a strong mandate. That's why I call upon you. All of those who wish well to Europe should become united and vote in favor of this mandate, because we need a strong mandate so that together with the Commission we can convince the governments that want to make savings on security. You cannot save on security. You must not do it. So to the thrifty countries, it's also your security. We need to take care of your security as well today by building a more effective and bigger budget, and not a reduced budget. A reduced budget is for those who are not wishing well to Europe, those who are against a strong and effective Europe. Let's vote in favor of adopting this budget, because that's what's in the interest of Europeans.
Thank you. I cannot see Eric Sargiacomo in the chamber. It would appear that he is not here. I therefore give the floor to Thomas Buczek.
Panie Komisarzu. Commissioner, the next MMF is not a budget, it's a fund of exploiting Europeans. The European Commission is estimating that it's going to be 60 to 80% bigger than the current perspective. For the years 21 to 27, the budget was 1.2 trillion. Now for the years 28-34, we're expecting 2 trillion. 200 billion. Added on top, you have a midterm revision and inflation, and you have 700 on top. Where is it coming from? Because of our debt. Debt from the COVID times, which we are about to pay back. If that were not enough, in the new financial perspective, we're going to spend 200 billion, 10%, to be transferred outside the EU to other countries. This is madness, ladies and gentlemen. They have one objective: to bring more debt, to drive us into debt to such an extent that the federalization process becomes irreversible. And then, instead of sovereignty of nations, we'll have sovereignty and supremacy of Eurocrats. We cannot agree to that. Thank you.
Buczek, you have a blue card from Mr. Corner. Vous avez la parole.
You have the floor.
Vielen Dank, Herr Kollege, dass Sie meine...
Thank you for taking my blue card question. You said that the budget is getting much bigger, but you use the absolute figures. If you use the relative figures, so adjusted with inflation, then the budget is actually not a huge amount bigger, at least according to the Commission's proposal. When you're using such big figures, maybe you should include inflation as well. That would be more reasonable and show that the budget, at least in the Commission's proposal, and you don't reduce it for debt, is not growing that much.
Jeśli mówimy o...
For the period 21 to 27, when it was first adopted, the budget was 1,047 billion. And when the financial perspective is coming to an end, is 1.2 trillion. So I am including in my presentation the inflation as well. But I think it's not me who's wrong, but you.
Merci beaucoup. Nous poursuivons.
Thank you. Let's continue. The next speaker is Dick Erickson.
Thank you, President. When the Levine government was negotiating the current long-term budget, we saw an increase in the budget of 68%. And there were all sorts of taxes for the union that were brought in to cover this. And the centre parties supported the Social Democrats on this. Only the left and the right voted against. And once again, we're seeing a risk of nationalisation, reduction. So forget all the pretty words about competitiveness, because if we don't redefine the way we're going to have more ineffective planned economies, which are going to weaken growth and weaken competitiveness. It impoverishes welfare for all Europeans. Basically, it's the wrong path to take. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Anouk van...
Thank you. The next speaker is Anouk van Broek.
Voorzitter.
President, a European AI company that grows to become a world player, an external border on solid foundations, a defence that keeps our continent so safe that we can all live within those borders safely. That's what this budget should enable, and that is possible. But then we need to be honest, because more money is not the answer. Making choices is. We need to invest, but if you just invest in a bit across the board, you're not actually investing in anything. We need to have less of a budget, but we need to dare to take choices in things that make us stronger. Safety, economy, innovation. And choosing is one thing, but delivery is something else. It's just as important. That's where the shoe pinches, because taxpayers need to expect that they can spend their taxpayers' money and it be spent properly. Time and time again, the European Court of Auditors is saying this is not the case. It's time to change things, to get better overview of where European monies go and have a stronger approach for misuse of money, because every euro counts. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, cher collègue. Diana Ribay.
Thank you. The next speaker is Diana Ribay.
President, Commissioner, what we have here is not a technical matter. It's a political decision for our path forward. The Europe they're putting forward is not what we want. It cuts social funds. It cuts support to the countryside. They call it flexibility, but we call it abandonment. Even more seriously, the EU will grow further away from its citizens. Local communities will not be involved in the design of how funds are spent. Those who know what is really needed will be excluded. And is that really the way forward? Sidelining citizens when we need them the most. We won't accept this. That's why our parliamentary group recognises the work of this Parliament, which is reflected in today's report. But let me warn you of something. This is the starting point, not the end point. We don't want the Europe of capitals, but the Europe of territories, peoples and diversity. That is our Europe. For those reasons, we will continue to fight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Estrella Galán.
Merci, President. Estamos ante uno de...
Thank you, President. We are at a decisive point in this term, deciding on the budget for the EU over the next 7 years. We're going to be deciding which way forward we want for the EU in political and social terms. And that is very important, since we're deciding on the futures of the lives of millions of citizens. Now, the Commission has put forward a war budget, one that leaves people behind. And we cannot exchange social cohesion for tanks and drones, which is what the Commission wants. Because if you want real security, you need a cohesive society. You are aiming to slash social Europe, which covers the needs of the most vulnerable, with millions of people who are unhoused, with families who are not making ends meet, with housing that is unaffordable for so many. We must protect the European Social Fund Plus and make sure it has the right budget so that it can address the real problems faced by European citizens. I have a request for you. Listen to the people, to civil society, to NGOs, because that fund has improved the lives of almost 9 million people in Spain and many more across Europe. Deciding on the kind of Europe that we want is in our hands. Are we going to abandon the most vulnerable, or are we going to make sure no one is left behind? Thank you.
J'ai le plaisir de donner la parole.
Thank you. I now have the pleasure of giving the floor to Monica Holmeyer.
Commissar. President, Commissioner, President in Office of the Council, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, the Commission's proposal sets out good priorities when it comes to competitiveness, innovation, research. But when it comes to defence, it's, I think, a little less than what most people had hoped. And when it comes to infrastructure, we can see some strengthening where it's necessary, but there are difficulties as well within this new proposal, especially if you want to talk about simplification. Simplification shouldn't just apply to the Commission and their staff. It should apply to member states and final beneficiaries. We should avoid any proposals of complete centralisation and renationalisation. We need to have more Europe in this report and also bring in the regions to allow them to have decision-taking procedures and powers. There are some countries that have many regions. Everything has to be conflated, and then at the end of the process, it needs to be divided up again. National programmes over 7 years have not proved to be successful because over 7 years, a lot can change. Can you just say, well, we need flexibility? Well, flexibility is not just something that's proffered to the Commission. It has to be provided to the regions as well. so they can act according to the principle of subsidiarity. National plans then have no place in an economy such as ours, and for this reason, the Parliament will have to bring about some changes, especially when it comes to the priorities of security, food supply, and the possibility for cohesion to make headway, and the question of including social policies as well.
Merci beaucoup, cher Monique.
Thank you very much, Monica. Now, Mr. Franqueira Rodriguez.
Obrigado, Sr. Presidente.
President, more than 60% of Europeans think the EU needs to be better equipped to deal with challenges such as public health, housing, education, politics, culture, security, defence. These are the areas where we are expected to act and provide answers. In this report, we don't shy away from the challenges we face. No, we tackle them head on. We're asking for a 10% increase for the MFF because we can't do more with less. Cohesion policy is the glue between regions and citizens, and the ESF is a way of ensuring that no one is left behind. We pay attention to farming, particularly in the outermost regions, and we want more money for the POSE programme, and we want more money for fisheries. This isn't a perfect budget, not at all, but what we're putting forward is better than the starting point. Let me pay tribute to the work done by the rapporteurs. This is the kind of Europe that we must be defending.
Speaker Jaroslava Pokorna-Yermanova, for 1 minute, please.
Colleagues, the MMF cannot only be about more money, it has to be about justice and efficiency of the EU. If we weaken our geographical position, we will weaken Europe. The cohesion policy cannot be to the detriment of the budget. We cannot be bad for states that have not experienced with drawing down. We cannot have a two-speed Europe. That is not acceptable. The EU will only be strong as strong will be its weakest link. We cannot concentrate money at the European Commission. It will not improve our competitiveness, but only its powers. We have to control our expenditure. The EU needs to prove that it can efficiently handle money that it has. If we just increase the budget, that doesn't make sense. We do not want new resources being ETS or new taxes. We refuse this because we need more competitiveness. If Europe is to do well, we need technological neutrality. That's why nuclear needs to be at the core. Thank you.
Michele Picaro, for 1 minute, please.
Today, the European Parliament will be adopting its position on the multi-annual financial framework, 2 trillion. Important choices with political backup that can't be ignored. And we strongly demand that we get good results, that we have clear money set aside for cohesion, numbers on the line that will substantiate demands of our farmers, help the food supply in our countries, and send out strong signals to our regions. We have a demographic challenge that we're facing, and we need to refer to the Mediterranean Pact as well. And we need to look at the energy mix, look at critical raw materials and European industry. We still have own resources. That's an issue that needs addressing. 60 billion euros per year, in addition, is going to hit companies hard. We don't accept that ideological choices, such as the Green Deal, as we've seen, will actually mortgage the future of this union. And for this reason, our position remains clear, pragmatic, and defending the genuine interests of citizens.
Speaker Moritz Körner, for 1 minute, please.
Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, natürlich ist es falsch, was die Rechten.
Colleagues, what the right are saying is wrong. Every Europe that goes towards a strong EU budget is well invested. At the end of the day, the net contributors also benefit from a strong single market. The truth is, we will probably have to do more with the same money in Europe. We won't have more money available. Let's look at it honestly. The member states are grappling with their own budgetary difficulties. And we've tried it with debt, with Next Gen EU. But that costs money because interest rates are going up. So then what's left? New taxes. Someone else should pay, not the Europeans. Now, we've been laughing at Trump's love for tariffs because he says that the Americans won't pay the tariffs, but they are paying at the end of the day. And the same applies to a digital tariff. At the end of the day, we'll be footing that digital bill. We must have a focus, we must save, we must make cuts, and we must invest in security and defense.
From Mularczyk, Arkadiusz 590. Colleague Mularczyk, floor is yours. Please.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Sorry, just for headphones.
Okay.
2 seconds.
Dziękuję bardzo. Panie pośle.
Thank you. A few months ago, I personally provided you with a report of war losses incurred to Poland by Germany in World War II. As you well know, there was never a settlement for the results of World War II. Moreover, Polish victims, similarly to Greek victims, have no way of seeking damages from the German state. Do you think the European Union should create a fund for victims of World War II? Because this hasn't been done yet, and Polish and Greek victims still have not had any redress from Germany for World War II.
Herr Kollege Milarczyk,
Mr. Milarczyk, you didn't give me that. You showed up in my office, you broke into my office, you filmed me, and I had to then flag that to the President and report it to the President. Now, many decades have passed. There has been a lot of European solidarity over the years. Many Polish taxpayers have benefited from the EU and our EU budget, and we are building something, shaping something together. And this is kind of divisive politics. You're trying to drive a wedge. You're not interested in the future of Europe. You are not interested in the German-Polish friendship, which I am standing up for.
Next speaker, David Cormon. Floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, chers collègues.
Thank you, President, colleagues. Today, the Parliament is setting out its opinion on the upcoming MFF budget. And the Parliament's sending a very clear message indeed to the Commission. We are not in favour of the structure that the Parliament is attempting to impose upon our institutions. The Parliament is speaking out clearly on the amount, since we want to see 1.27% of GNI, excluding NGEU repayment. And we really feel that that is the minimum to try and push forward the policy that is necessary for this moment. Furthermore, the Parliament is alarmed at the architecture put forward by the Commission, which would, in a technocratic manner, re-centralise the way our budget is managed, and therefore it would mean that the Parliament was not able to exercise its scrutiny role. Frankly, no way. Hard stop there, and the Commission really needs to hear that. We'll also be holding discussions with the Council, and I very much hope that we'll be able to preserve key policy, such as social, the CFP, the CAP, the environment. You say that flexibility doesn't need to mean opacity, but the Parliament will not give up on its scrutiny role when it comes to the budget. Thank you.
Demirel, for 1 minute, please.
Dankeschön, Herr Präsident.
President, undemocratic, unsocial, and militaristic. That is the draft budget from the Commission. Hugely non-transparent tubs of money, little parliamentary scrutiny. Everything is subject to two priorities: militarism and competitiveness. 500 billion euro for competitiveness fund. That's von der Leyen's mega fund for education, research, industry and armament, all shoved together. So we move money from social to armament. All of that is happening in this time when many people are worried about their futures. This military logic runs through the whole budget. Environmental sustainability is losing importance, and human beings are lost in all of this. And we hear in the EU that we want everyone to have the same standards of living. But who's going to benefit? Big companies and those who build weapons. If there's something good that we can do, is that she's almost as bad as Trump these days.
For 1.5 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, obviously we're facing new challenges in a challenging time for the EU, but that cannot mean that the financial demands that we're facing need to be passed on to the member states, because we are responsible for what goes on here. Regional policy, common agricultural policy, we cannot do this for the sake of politicians. We should make sure that the money goes to those who have something to say about this. In our proposal, we are looking at raising this from the 1.27% of GNI, because we won't be able to cover the obligations we have. We need to be that honest here, and the member states need to be that honest as well when they take their decisions on the budget. If we want to make sure that we have security of supply of food across Europe, then we'll need more money than we have at the moment, because we're not going to be able to do the same things with less money. So I'd call on you to support the proposals. Now, the Commission's proposal of using the budgetary structure and make it simpler, I'm not sure about that, because things look like they're becoming more complicated. They either become more complicated or more superficial. Neither is what we're looking for. What is particularly problematic is the roles of the regions and the local authorities being undermined. They're being weakened considerably. I've dreamed of a Europe of regions for a long time, and we're further away from that than ever today. What I am pleased about, and I'm grateful to the rapporteurs, is to look at the peripheral, outermost regions, and mountainous regions are mentioned specifically, and I think that's well worth mentioning, and I think that deserves our sustained support.
Next speaker, Marit Mai, for 1 minute, please.
Ja, dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. Does it matter if the European Union spends more or less money? Yes, it does. It does make it more important that the right people are getting the right money, people who need it. But people who end up banging their heads against the same walls. Energy bills are too high, no work experience, no affordable houses, no prospects. But the Commission is suggesting we're going to provide this big pot of money, and the member states are free to spend it how they will. No European policies, no clear guidelines, and much less money, moreover, for social policies. We need European funds that actually make an impact, so that people who have spent years looking for work can find that work, can find somewhere to live. We don't want to sign blank checks for member states. What we need is a strong and independent social fund at European level, so that the European Union can invest in social security for a future for everybody, and especially for people in Europe who are in a vulnerable position. Thank you.
Next speaker, Roman Haider, please.
Danke, Vorsitzender. Dieser
President, the Commission proposal for the MFF is nothing more than an ice-cold putsch attempt, an attempt to seize power over the budget. And if you refuse to obey, then you will have to submit. And there will also be a major increase in own resources. That's to pay off the huge debts which were taken out in contravention of the treaty. And there are threats being made here by the Commission, but there's something that's lacking here. There's no savings or cuts. We have to cut everywhere in Europe except in the EU budget. That word doesn't even exist in the EU budget. We will continue to puff up the budget. We are just allowing the Commission to get completely out of hand here.
Georgiana Teodorescu, please.
Thank you, Chair.
Concluziile mele după aprofundarea.
My conclusions after reviewing the report. Although for 2028-2034 the European Commission has announced the largest budget in the EU history, it is actually much smaller than the previous budget. A significant portion, 150 billion euros, must be repaid. Although the European Parliament boasts of increasing this so-called historic budget, the additional difference is actually generated by the new taxes that will be paid by citizens, including Romanians. Policies that are 60 years old, like the Common Agricultural Policy or Cohesion Policy, will no longer have their own separate budgets and will face drastic cuts, 30% less compared to the current financial year. I come from a country where elections were cancelled without evidence, and I say that this new conditionality can easily become a blackmail tool. Therefore, if the cancellation of the Romanian elections were considered a violation of the rule of law, funds could be suspended immediately. If the European Union wishes to continue as it began, then it has a duty to build a future dedicated to these values that provides priority to agriculture, cohesion and industry.
Ivo Verhofstadt.
Chers collègues, il y a presque 2 ans.
Colleagues, almost 2 years ago, Mario Draghi warned us if Europe didn't change tracks, it was going to die in a slow agony. And so my question to you is, where is that 800 billion a year? Now, I've been listening to you for 2 years. The programs, the competitiveness fund, all of that is a way forward. But this is all variations on a theme. So let me say again, even more clearly this time, if we don't take action firmly, Europe will die. You are, we are, the frogs in the water that's slowly healing up to boiling. We have noble ambitions, but we might bring them down because we don't take action. What we need today, colleagues, is a shock, a break with the past for energy independence, for a real EU tax policy that gives us the income that we need to protect our standards. We know what needs to be done, and we have the means to do it. The only question is, will we be brave enough to do it? I certainly hope so.
Speaker Janusz Lewandowski, please.
President, Commissioner, MFF is a bold venture into the future as we are programming Union until 2034. And this is vision with figures in our unpredictable world. And this is never business as usual, always exceptional circumstances. Now we have war back on our continent, therefore we should equip our first ever Commissioner for Defence with real budget. Now this is all about off-budget. Equally important is to make it more transparent by ring-fencing cohesion, agriculture, fisheries and social fund. Equally important is to involve regions in design and implementation that makes Europe more visible, therefore more useful for the citizens. When distributing competitiveness fund and Horizon, of course, on the basis of excellence, we should take care also about geographical balance. Flexibility, nobody's contesting, especially in dealing with external world, but it cannot be excessive discretion of the Commission. We need own resources to repay new generation, not at the cost of existing programs. It should be placed above ceiling. Good to have deal end of the year. People are not interested in interinstitutional disputes. They want us to deliver. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Irene Tinagli, please.
Thank you, President. The outcome of the interim report on the MFF marks an important step forward. I think we have built an ambitious yet responsible position, strengthening the EU budget to better address social challenges the green transition, and Europe's competitiveness in a complex geopolitical context. But let me focus on one specific thing, because I'm very pleased that for the very first time, housing enters the European budget. We know that we are dealing with a huge affordability crisis for the housing in the European Union, particularly heavy for workers and younger generation. We need to act. And we included in this interim report, we have identified instruments and resources from cohesion funds to investment tools to crowd in further private investments to build a genuine European approach. Of course, this is a first step, but I think it's very important. If we don't start addressing this crisis now, and if we don't start to do it seriously, we will undermine the basis of the future of this continent and of its competitiveness and cohesion. So I'm glad about that, but of course we will also need the help of the member states, their commitment for further resources and measures. Thank you.
Sir, colleague Tenagli, you have a blue card from João Oliveira on the left. You take it, yeah, please.
Interpretation. Obrigado.
Can you hear? Mr. Nagli, you're head of the Housing Committee and you spoke about that. In fact, it's really important that the report on housing looks at the problems in housing. Madam, are you happy with the fact that housing will be under the NRPPs, but that will cause some limitations and some restrictions? And then there's also a lack of serious funding for housing under the next MFF. Aren't you worried about that? Isn't that going to stop the goals from actually being achieved?
Okay. I have no problem in saying that I would have wanted more. Yes. We always want more. When we entered this process in the budget, I would have loved to have a full dedicated fund exclusively for that. But I'm happy that still this priority has been recognized, it's been included, resources have been identified in the different programs. Of course, this calls the member states and their responsibility. I know that now it is this inside the national funds, but this calls the responsibility of the member states. We cannot build the European Union unilaterally. We need a cooperation between our institutions, European institutions, governments and member states. I hope we can start from here to build a better European Union.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
For clear answer. Please, Eniko Gyori, floor is yours.
Képviselőtársaim, az EP fősodorpártjai kiszorított.
Thank you very much, honourable members. The Patriots have been sidelined from this discussion on the MFF. Thus, it has been impossible to make improvements compared to the original Commission proposal. Resources have been cut and the Commission has been completely empowered. Only under coercion will the funds be dispersed. If Commission criteria are not complied with, then a farmer, for instance, will have no access to funds. In the future, when the budgetary measures are not complied with in Hungary, Hungary will be further punished with sanctions. In addition, the sovereignty of the member states will be limited and the parties will contribute to that. But what would be needed is a plan that protects cohesion and doesn't slash it.
Smith, please.
Voorzitter, President, Commissioner, this multi-annual financial framework gives rise to all sorts of feelings. An increase in 10%, new EU taxes for the Netherlands, the biggest net payer, makes it very difficult to swallow. The Corona Recovery Fund was 10% of the budget. It's not a good model to follow, and that's a warning we should heed. We shouldn't have European taxpayers' money going to companies who are not helping subsidiarity. Let's not give money to left-wing liberal hobbies. Let's look at defence and innovation funds. I'd like to express a vote of thanks to the co-rapporteurs. You, as we, are asking for earmarked budgets for agriculture, rural development, fisheries, no renationalisation, but a strong European policy for agriculture, a level playing field, and fishers and farmers have been suffering and drowning in red tape. Enough is enough. Get your hands off our horticulturists, our agriculturists and our fishers. Food security has to be helped here. This must be the message that comes from this chamber.
Thank you. Next speaker, Kiran Maluli. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a defining moment for the European Parliament and for the future direction of the European Union. The next 7-year budget is crucial to give stability to citizens, to farmers, to regions and to businesses in the challenging times in which we live. Our position must be clear. I'm going to be specific. The new multiannual financial framework must be set at a minimum, Commissioner, of 1.27% of GNI, the money generated by EU individuals and businesses. We must also exclude the Next Generation EU debt repayments from this equation, because anything less would leave the Union underfunded and unable to meet the scale of the challenges before us. For agriculture, Parliament must be equally firm. The Common Agricultural Policy must have a dedicated and a robust budget of 433 billion at least in current prices. CAP cannot be treated as a leftover or absorbed into national envelopes. Food production is now a core part of European security. Food security is national security. So Europe must protect its farmers' capacity to produce food. Parliament has a democratic mandate, so if the final budget fails to protect CAP, the crucial issues of leader and just transition funds, then this Parliament must be ready to withhold its consent and say no.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next speaker, Carmen Crespo Diaz.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, colleagues. Firstly, I very much hope that this MFF might have done away with the idea of renationalisation, but that's not what the Member States wanted. So now the EPP is tabling amendments to specify what countries need, particularly when it comes to the productive sectors. We want 45 billion for agriculture, 10% for that rural objective should also go to the LEADER programme. And there's the matter of investing in cooperatives and agri-food industries that are key for the future of rural areas. Apiculture, too, is a major issue, and there are producers' associations that are working very hard to export their products. They need support, too. Furthermore, the Competitiveness Fund, that is not something that should be restricted when it comes to agriculture and water. There are certain issues in Andalusia that require support, and I think that it would be a mistake to restrict the programme to purely agricultural matters. Then when it comes to fisheries, we need to boost the budget as well, giving an opportunity to coastal areas and fisher people all over Europe. And if we are to dilute our environmental funds, well, that will be a problem for the climate. But we need to be very clear on the fact that we want to have quality food now and in the future, and we want to see thriving rural areas in Europe. And that is the direction that all of our amendments and proposals ought to be going in. Thank you.
Very much. Next speaker, Nicolas González Casares.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Europe is facing colossal challenges, and what's the Commission's priority? Tackling the challenges of our time with a ridiculous budget, undermining the European social model with deep cuts to cohesion, fisheries and the environment. No, this is not the right way forward for Europe when our world is burning because of dictators and autocrats or those who aspire to that. Europe cannot rely on a budget that's been drawn up for a world that no longer exists. And so, in the face of this proposal from the Commission, we need to see more cohesion. We need to boost investment in food sovereignty, including fisheries. We need the biggest social fund in history. That's what we need, as well as moving forward with the green transition. Or isn't it clear yet to see how important the Green Deal is? Not to forget the LIFE programme, which is a flagship for Europe. And then there is the matter of Europe's standing and presence in the world. That's the response that the Parliament needs to be giving. It's the response from my group, the Socialists, more Europe, not less Europe. Thank you.
Christian Terhes, floor is yours.
This proposal on the MFF poses a grave problem for our future. This has become an ideological and political tool through this so-called conditionality of the rule of law. We're not saying that the rule of law is not important, but we don't have clear, transparent and objective criteria that take into account the tradition of each and every member state. This is why it makes it prone to abuse by the European Commission. Article 7 says that European funding can be blocked on the basis of reports on the rule of law, but these reports do not follow clear methodology. The sources are debatable, obscure, and some bureaucrats draw them up with no real expertise. And when we talk about the rule of law, we're talking about transparency. We cannot accept that in an utterly untransparent way, these European funding be handed out to member states according to opaque criteria. The European funding needs to be used to help the development of European member states and citizens. They should not become weapons, ideological weapons in the hands of the Commission.
Lorenz, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
President, this time it's serious. We can't just have business as usual when things are different now, different from 2020. The West is falling apart. There's dumping and American protectionism, which are a cause for concern. The next 7-year budget will provide a partial response. It certainly is only piecemeal. The member states have become the centre of gravity, but they must take a good look at themselves. There are going to be many unknown challenges along the path. So we must strive for an ever closer union, as is enshrined in the treaty. We, as MEPs, must continue to be a powerhouse as we were up until the beginning of the millennium.
Christian Ehler, for 1.5 minutes, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, before I start to put some things into proportion, in Germany, the biggest net payer in Europe, the average tax payer pays 240 euros for Europe a year. 240 euros. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't spend money properly, but we should put that in proportion. And I don't want to go into this shame and blame game, but in Poland, it's a net receiver country. And for the good reason, because the German taxpayer profits from Europe, as the Europeans, as the Polish citizens do that. So we shouldn't mislead the Europeans about the cost of Europe. We have to spend that money effectively, and I think this report is contributing to that, but we should put that in proportion, because using a budget debate for anti-Europeanism is very problematic. We lie to the people, not to their benefit. We lie to the people to show them in a direction. It's very problematic for the future generations. In terms of the proposal, just shortly, I think the proposal is referring rightly to the need for investments in Europe. It's strengthening the investment part. It's painful because more of the same might not be the motto for that, and we have to prioritize. Horizon, ECU, ECF, investments in future, investment in technology, in infrastructure, in defense. And we can explain that to the European citizen. They want that. But what I have to say is that we have to really get in a granularity, because what the Commission with this 100% flexibility wants to have is a chèque blanche, and that we can't grant. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, Giuseppe Lupo, please.
Grazie, Presidente, Commissario.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. The 2020-2034 MFF will define how European resources are spent for the Europe that we want, the one that David Sassoli talked about. That is why the Parliament is calling for an increase of at least 10% funding our new priorities. That is not something that should happen at the expense of cohesion, of fisheries, of the CAP. We need to make sure that we have joint debt and own resources. And we need to make sure that there is the right kind of funding for cohesion, and that funding is ring-fenced. We need to pour funding into fisheries for generational renewal and for our blue economy. The EU needs investment, as Mario Draghi said. Competitiveness and cohesion must go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. Thank you.
Next speaker, Tomasz Dechowski, please, 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. Ladies and gentlemen, Europe is at a crossroads. We have a war at our borders, instability in the Middle East, and there is a growing global competitiveness or global trade war with Donald Trump. This is not a time where we can hesitate. We need a strong Europe and we need a strong budget. That's why we demand a targeted increase in the MFF. And let's be frank, we cannot do more for less. That's an illusion. Each euro has to be checked. We cannot pay for projects that don't bring anything. We cannot invest into houses building in Slovakia. We cannot finance projects that do not bring about anything. That's why we are clear. No flexibility without control. We cannot transfer money without the Parliament's approval. And we also need stable and predictable financing. And to conclude, we cannot afford national projects without added value. No euros to cycling path, no euros invested in things that do not make any sense. We have to fight geopolitical threats. We need to support infrastructure. We need to invest into security. And we need to say that Europe needs to be stronger. Thank you.
Vitenis Povilos Andrukaitis will be the next speaker.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. We all understand that the budget put forward by the European Commission simply isn't enough. 1.27% of GNI is merely a minimum. That's a minimum that we need to defend here in the Parliament. And we need to make sure also that we exclude debt servicing from the budget. That should be dealt with separately. Now, of course, we understand that the European Union's commitments must be achieved. Solidarity must be guaranteed. Draghi, Letta, Niinistö all said what needed to be done. And they furthermore explained how we should invest. The EU for Health programme should be an area where we invest in, but we need to invest furthermore in public health and research and much more. Thank you.
Linz, for 1 minute, please.
Herr Präsident, Herr Kommissar, liebe Commissioner, President, colleagues, as the rapporteur for the CAP, I want to thank the two rapporteurs. You listened to what the Agri Committee said. A budget of 433 billion euros for agriculture under the next MFF. It's about giving farmers certainty so that they can plan. That is a strong bedrock for agriculture in the European Union. I'm glad that we've got this support across the groups. It's also important to me that we send a signal about the structure and the architecture of the next MFF and the CAP. We must continue to have the successful two-pillar structure because rural development is a fundamental part of forward-looking future-proofed rural areas in Europe. For that, we need to have a decent budget. It's not about pitting urban areas versus rural areas. It's not the mayor versus the farmer. It's about cohesion in Europe.
Next speaker, Hannes Heide, please.
Danke, Herr Präsident.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. If the European Union wants to take on more tasks, and the member states claim that they want that to happen, then it can only happen with a more ambitious budget rather than the same or less money. We find ourselves in a very difficult situation economically. Investments in areas that have growth potential are absolutely essential. One of those is the cultural and creative sector with 8 million jobs, 200 billion turnover. The music market alone has grown by at least 10%. Our flagship programs for culture, youth and education, Agora EU, Creative Europe and Erasmus+, are achieving a great deal with quite limited budgets in terms of their effectiveness, strengthening democracy and competitiveness. Erasmus Plus is the successful program of the European Union. Many have tried to copy it but have failed. And if the European citizens will be able to take part in this program at least once in their lives, then we have to have an increase. Draghi is suggesting times in the budget by 4. So for Erasmus Plus and Agora EU, we're seeing advances there and they're strengthening the feeling for Europe. Thank you.
Next speaker, Paulo do Nascimento Cabral.
President, Commissioner, let there be no doubt about it. Those who vote against this report are voting against European farmers, European fishers, against our rural areas, and against our outermost regions, such as the Azores and Madeira Islands. We can't do more with less. But when we talk about defence, we have to ask, what are we defending? Competitiveness. What brings growth? There's a clear answer. Putting food on our plates is defending Europe. Promoting our policies means promoting competitiveness. We must have farming and fisheries. We must have the involvement of rural areas. Otherwise, everything we've talked about will be dead letter. We need to involve the outermost regions and have a strong POSI. We need to have a Europe with more security, with more involvement of farmers and fishers. We cannot ignore the geostrategic potential of the outermost regions, as is laid down in Article 349 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union. Thank you very much. I really want to thank the rapporteurs.
Card from João Oliveira. You do not need translation, so to have the use.
Indeed.
President, Honourable Member, cohesion, farming and fisheries, that adds up to about 75% of the current MFF, but it will go down to just 45% on the next MFF. And so we won't even be at 50%. How can this add up? How can you defend farmers when there are these swinging cuts? And what about the rules under the next MFF? The new rules will mean that there will be a fight between farmers and those for others, fighting for others. Okay, it's good that POSI hasn't been got rid of, but there are many issues still, nevertheless. Thank you very much for your question. I have to say I don't completely agree. We hope that by approving this, we will have more money available for farming and 100 million euros extra for fishing. And then there will be more money for rural areas too by voting on this report. So this is more money for farming, fisheries and for our regions, including our outermost regions. I therefore think this report is a good document. It changes the path of the initial Commission proposal, and I really want to thank the two rapporteurs for the work they've done on this.
For 1 minute, please.
Thank you, President. We're not just talking about money here. I think it's become clear. We're talking about the future of Europe. Where do we want to invest? Where does our future lie? Where does the money need to get to? I'm very pleased about the report, as has been said, because it's not pitting urban areas against rural areas, but we're showing that actually the European Social Fund still constitutes a major plank of Europe that helps people and gives Europe a certain amount of soul in every town, city and village on the countryside where people can see that ESF is making a difference. Hence, it's important that it isn't just left to one side. We need to make sure that the money there is ring-fenced. It's a word in English, but when you say it in German, it really sounds like a protective wall, because the social workers, the vulnerable people in this populations, they don't have tractors to go to Brussels with. The ESF remains as a standalone fund.
Lucas Zipper, please.
Vielen Dank, Frau Kollegin.
Dear colleagues, sorry, I have a simple question. What exactly do you mean by ring fencing?
Ich habe gesagt, wir haben das Wort.
Well, I said we don't have that word in German, but it really means that we set aside money that's intended only for social payment, for investments in people in the next budget. It's reserved for that with the social goals that we in Europe have attached to them. So people can't say, oh, hang on, the farmers might need a bit more, or others can have a look and see how much money we've got left at the end of the day. No, this money is really set aside and reserved for the social objectives that we have in Europe. And that is a clear message that we can send out to everybody who maybe is waiting for some sort of qualification, who don't have a job, who need some sort of support to find their way back into society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, colleagues, you were so cooperative, and we had time to have a long speaker of Catch the Eye. So everybody will get the floor. It's one of the longest reach of Catch the Eye. But thank you very much for. So we will start with Michal Szczerba.
This becomes a key element of our security. The new budget after 2028 is a unique opportunity. We are stressing military mobility because we need it for our security. Money for military mobility will grow tenfold. We have 18 billion euros for military mobility under a new Connecting Europe facility. But also we showed and selected mobility corridors. 3 of them will be running through Poland. We also identified 500 neurologic infrastructure points, tunnels, bridges, railroads, and the new budget will allow us to modernize those facilities. It's a key budget which is a reply to the challenges of today, which ensures our interests. Thank you very much.
Cristina Maestre.
Thank you, President. The position of the European Parliament that we're voting on today is brave, committed and clear. It's clear because we have clearly said that we wish to place agriculture and rural areas there as our absolute red lines, and we need to make sure that we increase the funding going to that. Much is made here of traditional sectors, and agriculture actually is not a traditional sector. We should see it as a strategic sector, and that's what we're defending here in this chamber. We'll be voting on that shortly. But make no mistake, this is not just a matter of money. It's also a matter of avoiding the European Commission washing its hands of how these funds are managed. And it's clear that the CAP has been a success over the past 60 years. Breaking away from that, leaving this in the hands of the member states, well, that is a terrible mistake, and we need to make sure we don't go down that path. Thank you.
Arkadiusz Mularczyk.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Commissioner, we're talking a very important budget, about billions of euros, new priorities. But where do we find justice for European citizens? Let me stress that there are still people living, especially in Poland, in Greece, in other countries, who have no legal recourse, who have never been made good. So the question is that we're treating European citizens in such a way, and then on the other hand, we are preparing funds for Ukraine. We're spending money abroad for aid to Africa, for supporting colonial issues. We open to the needs of people around the world, but we are turning away from the needs of Polish and Greek citizens. Mr. Serafin, you're Polish, you know the problem. The Prime Minister of your government, Mr. Tusk, promised that a fund would be created for the victims of World War II. Please do something for the EU not to turn its head away from this problem. Thank you.
Next speaker, Lucas Zipper.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much to the people of Europe. I think we all agree that people deserve justice, Mr. Mulacic. I don't think it makes sense, again and again, trying to open up old wounds. The idea of the European Union is an idea of the future. It's an investment in the future, in a common approach to make headway. And that is what we're trying to achieve with this budget, and that's what we can achieve. I'm sure there is bits that you don't agree with, where we can fiddle a bit and tweak, but a recognition of this budget is a recognition for the future of Europe at a time where whatever's going on in the rest of the world, we understand that we need each other more than ever. Thank you.
Next speaker, Gordon Bosanak.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. I need to share something with you. Discussion on this budget at many moments sounded as if we were discussing national and not European budgets. And colleagues would often get confused whether we are talking about national or European budget. And I'm not surprised, because your proposal is really nationalizing budgets to a great extent. And this parliament is now clearly saying, no, we need to advance things. We need to have strong guarantees that we are talking about the European budget. This is what we will expect in the upcoming iteration. Two more things should be enhanced. First, national plans, which created this fear that we are renationalizing the budgets, really need to be bottom-up. Commission needs to have authority. If cities, towns, regions are not at the table and not sharing the plans together with the Prime Minister, then these national plans will not have approval. And finally, last time when we spent some money on resilience, some countries were successful, but for example, my country didn't manage to control inflation with these funds, and these mechanisms should be improved in the future.
Colleagues, throughout its existence, in the EU, the member states, the older member states, have received higher CAP subsidies. Lithuania cannot compete with these countries. Our farmers constantly talk about this subsidy gap. They want subsidies to be at the same level for each and every member state, but this falls on deaf ears within the Commission. Today we're talking about bureaucratic obstacles as well, of which there are many. And thus, we must say that the Green Deal is a major stumbling block for farmers. The whole of the agricultural sector is talking about this. We're talking about less bureaucracy because bureaucracy is suffocating this union.
The European Union, through its governments and the NATO decisions, are preparing a military budget, a war budget to fight the Euro-Asian group that's led by China, Russia, and also the USA. This 1.3 billion that will go to military mobility, dual infrastructure, will be to the detriment to education, health, pension funds and people's deposits. The competition between the various governments in the European Union, I would say between those who want to spend more or less, which in any case is paid to big consortiums, and also the competitions between governments who want to either impose more taxes or cut more spending, is a false dilemma. This is a budget that tastes of blood and bullets, and whatever the two big parties say in Greece, I think the people should rise up and say no budget for war.
Gracias, Presidente.
President, this is an important day for the Canary Islands and for all of the outermost regions, but particularly for our farmers. The European Parliament has sent a clear message. POSEI is a cornerstone of the agri-sector, and it must be firmly entrenched in the new MFF with its own decent budget. What we're going to approve today heads in that direction. We have said clearly that we are standing side by side with the Canary Islands with justice, cohesion and solidarity. What is at stake is more than just a budgetary matter. It's about the future of thousands of farmers who depend on this instrument for their survival. The Parliament has done its work. Thank you, Siegfried. Thank you, Carla. Now it's up to the Commission and Council to show commitment to these regions. I trust that we will have a deal which is in line with the Parliament's wishes, because the Canary Islands and all the outermost regions need this, but they deserve it too.
Speaker Matthias Ecke.
Vielen Dank.
Thank you very much. Europe is not investing enough in its future. We can see that clearly. We're falling back in terms of competitiveness vis-à-vis other great powers around the world. So it's important that this budget establishes the future way of working, looking at innovation, etc. But the member states of the EU are giving more and more tasks to the EU, and the financial resources just haven't kept pace. And if some heads of state and government are saying, well, there's no point giving the EU more money, that's not going to happen, then they've misunderstood this. You have to meet the promises. The Next Generation EU, the Corona Fund, was to make sure that new resources would pay back for those loans. And this is time to sort that out. It's not on that the rural areas and farmers have to pay in blood because this needs to be repaid. It's high time we tax the big tech companies. Parliament has to make it clear we stand on the side of the citizens, for the regions, for our Europe.
Thank you. Next speaker, Sebastian Timkinen.
Arvoisa puhemies.
President, I'd like to mention that we have a proverb in Finnish that the collected water doesn't remain in the well. But Ursula wants to pour more and more money into Brussels reservoirs. Now, I think we're talking about smart people. We don't need 7 billion to boost green growth. What we need is lower taxes. We can save on our expenditure. We have to see how these crises are developing and how we deal with the ramifications. But it's a question of saving money. We don't need new laws for nature protection. What we have now is the result of decisions we've already taken.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner. Whether it has been ensuring food security
overseeing peace projects or investing in regional development, EU financing has stretched far in Ireland. For the majority of Ireland's 53 year in the European community, we have been a net receiver. And while that contribution cannot be easily captured in a single figure, its impact is clear. Support to our farmers, fishers and regions, the infrastructure that connects our communities and the research that improves lives. But we have been reminded in recent months that we face multiple crises, from energy shocks to tariffs on trade. While I absolutely welcome the Parliament is seeking a 10% spending boost, we need renewed focus on getting this money to the ground, to those who need it most. Co-financing must be simplified and overlapping rules avoided. At the halfway point of the EU's largest recovery fund, less than 1/3 of the money had been disbursed. A bigger budget will mean little if it doesn't reach the people. So let's make sure it does. And thanks to the rapporteurs for all the work on this report.
Thank you. Next speaker, Sabrina Repp.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident, Herr Kommissar.
Thank you very much. Now, the interim report makes it very clear where the weak points are, particularly in the Commission's proposal. No clear budget, no clear security, no simplification for recipients, and no clear perspectives for regions, for rural areas, and so on and so forth. This is not to the interest of citizens. And one has to say very, very clearly that something has to be done very, very, very clearly for them on in all aspects. And nobody takes the responsibility for all of this. And that's why I ask for the Commission to say we need not less Europe, we need more Europe. And this means working concertedly in that particular direction. Clear priorities for all and not conflictual messages. We need clear budgets, clear planning, clear participation of regions as well. This is what's important for farmers. Europe has to be closer to people and not further away from people, and we have to make that very clear.
Next speaker, Francesco José Milán Mon.
The report that we're going to vote on today is very good for fisheries and agriculture since the huge, brutal cut. We're talking about over 700 billion now for these sectors, a 20% increase thanks to the rapporteurs, particularly Siegfried Mureşan. We've seen a good defence of fisheries as a priority to the EPP. But there are challenges here with decarbonisation, modernisation, fleet renewal, generational renewal, a drop in fish consumption, rising costs, etc. So to face those challenges, we need to ensure there's adequate financing. So we call for approving the report and to ensure that in the later interinstitutional negotiations, this momentum is maintained. We hope Council will be up to the task, meet our expectations. This will be positive for cohesion policy and for financing European defence, which is so important now that the ghost of war is back on the European continent.
Yes.
Commissioner, very, very correctly, you emphasized that we have mapped the next steps that are to be taken as far as economic policy. And in a very, very fine way, very clearly, Mr. Mureşan emphasized the issue of border security. And just as Mr. Mureşan said, it's particularly important right now because you know that on a daily basis, Turkey is threatening Greece. This is unacceptable. Each day that Turkey threatens Greece, there ought to be cuts in the funds that go to Turkey. I'd like to thank colleague Tavares for emphasizing the social dimension as well of the budget. And I'm particularly glad because supporting SMEs, households, farmers, regions, islands, and alpine areas, they are number one. We have to provide for health, for education as well. Mr. Mureşan, I'd like to thank you because the 10 points that concern Greece as well are now within this particular text concerning the budget. So thank you.
Maria Grappini, normally you have to be here a bit earlier, so you have a last slot in Catch the Eye, please. You are welcome. You are welcome. Please, you have a floor.
Thank you very much, President. Mulțumesc foarte mult.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, of course, the new financial framework is extremely important for the future of Europe. And as a citizen and as a person who is the Vice President of the IMCO Committee, I wish this budget were a lot clearer. First of all, we should have a separate budget for agriculture, a dedicated budget for agriculture. We should have more funds targeted for the SMEs to make them more sustainable, more resilient. And also, extremely important, how do we allocate the budgets to fight the housing crisis? It's not a perfect budget. However, I would like to thank the colleagues who made corrections to the Commission's proposal. I hope we can make it better. And also we should think how to save money, because we should not only think how to spend the money. We still have some reserves. There's a lot of money to be recovered from frauds. We talked about taxing the digital, the crypto, so we can have a good budget. Thank you.
Closing KHI procedure. And now time for a commission to Commissioner Serafin, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Honourable members, that was indeed a rich debate. At the end, I would like to express hope that tomorrow, when the vote is taking place, today, when the vote is taking place, you will demonstrate unity and you will support the report of Siegfried Mureşan and Carla Tavares. Even if, as you know, we do not see eye to eye on each and every topic, even if, as you know, we can expect that the approach of the Council, in particular in the context of the size of the budget, will be a different one. But it's important that you will have your position on time, supported by the strong majority. That will be an argument in the incoming negotiations. And the debate today also demonstrated that while talking about the MFF, we also would need to talk about the nature of the European Union and the way in which the European Union should react to what is going on around us. I believe, and I'm absolutely convinced about it, that the Europeans want to see not only more unity, but that they are aware that either we will hang out together or we will be hanged separately. They want stronger European Union investing into common projects, and that is exactly why we have the European Union budget in place. I want to also, I think I can count on you when it comes to increases in the EU budget, which overall did not really increase dramatically. We proposed as the European Commission to increase the level of spending from 1.13% of GNI to 1.26% of GNI. But there are areas where the increases are much bigger. A week ago, I was on the border between Poland and Germany, and I saw internal border controls. In our MFF, we propose to increase by a factor of 4 level of spending on the protection of the external border. Some might say it's a lot, but I'm pretty sure that is still much cheaper than introducing internal controls within the single market. And I can say exactly the same about security and defense. I can say exactly the same about research and innovation. If we spend money together, we actually can have more security, better protection of our borders, better innovation and more research for the same money. So indeed, we live at times when every euro cent counts. And the honest debate should be on at which level that euro cent should be spent and what is the best way to achieve value added for Europeans. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Now Siegfried Mureşan has the floor, rapporteur.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, many thanks for the unity which the European Parliament has shown throughout this process. Carla Tavares and myself as co-rapporteurs have worked in a very inclusive, transparent manner with all of the sectorial committees of the Parliament, with all political groups who want a stronger budget for a stronger Europe. I would, of course, like to first and foremost thank my co-rapporteur, Carla Tavares, for all the work that she has put into this report, the shadows of the groups, of the political groups that have worked with us. We propose as a European Parliament a budget for more security, for more defence, for a stronger European Union, for more competitiveness, for innovation, for a digital agenda. A budget which does not forget about the vulnerable parts of our population, because Europe has always had a social side as well. We propose a budget for energy security and food security, for border protection, for cyber security and defence. And we want decisions to be made as close as possible to the citizens. This is why we want a strong role for the European regions in the decision and in the implementation of the budget. We want regions to have a binding role to decide how money is being spent, because they are close to the citizens and they know the needs of the citizens best. We also want that the European Parliament has a strong say, because this only ensures transparency, democratic control and accountability. And we want a strong rule of law conditionality. Let me be clear. Everyone who receives European funds has to respect European values. We want predictability. Farmers and regions, researchers, beneficiaries of EU funds for large infrastructure projects should all know what resources are available for them in the next years. Predictability is important. If we tell a researcher, we give you money this year, but we will see next year, he will for sure do his research in the United States, in Asia, or somewhere outside Europe. This is why we want clear funding for each category of beneficiaries. And then we have Mr. Bardella here, who tells us he wants to cut the budget of the European Union. And what Mr. Bardella and their peers are proposing, what he said earlier today, means that we would have less funding for French farmers and for farmers everywhere in Europe. There would be less funding for French fishers and for fishers everywhere in Europe. There would be less funding for French industry and for industry everywhere in Europe. And the idea which anti-European extremists are telling, we will weaken Europe, we will reduce the budget, we will do it better at national level, is false. This is exactly what led to Brexit. This is exactly the lie which the Brexit campaign told to the people of the United Kingdom, and we see all the misery right now. This is why we reject this as a European Parliament, and we will adopt a budget which is future-oriented, which is relevant. And in order to have enough resources, not to make cuts, to pay back the debt, and not to burden member states with additional contributions, we propose own resources for the budget of the Union. And we have 3 new ideas, Commissioner: a digital levy, an own resource based on online gaming and gambling, and an own resource based on crypto transactions. And Commissioner, we call on you and your services to do technical work together with the Council and with us in the next weeks to see what are the possible own resources. You have made some proposals as a Commission last year, but we believe new ideas deserve to be brought to the table, and we are ready to discuss also with Member States any other ideas that they might have on own resources. So, Commissioner, please let us do some technical work to have alternatives to be prepared. Today, the European Parliament will adopt its position. We want a fast agreement with the Council and with the Commission. As of today, we are ready for talks. We will have a mandate, and the ball is now in the court of the Council. We're looking forward to discussions to adopt a meaningful budget soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, rapporteur Carla Tavares as well. So I hope you will be a bit shorter, so dear colleague.
Thank you, President, dear Commissioner, caras e caros colegas.
Dear colleagues, we're all here to talk about the next budget and the level of commitment and ambition, not leaving anyone behind. We want to ensure that traditional European policies can continue, but we also need to be forward-looking. Competitiveness, security, defence, support for third countries, looking at what's happening through global Europe. But we also need to take account of events and ensure that our budget is more ambitious so that we have sustainable, predictable, resilient resources. And I think that is our significant priority here. We need to have fair, new sources of financing, because otherwise we're going to be postponing, undermining, failing to achieve what we're promising the people. Europe has to be more participative, that we need to be a participatory democracy. We need to be meeting the challenges and meeting people's expectations. We have to put ourselves in the right position to take the next step. This report is not a landing zone. It's not the end of the story. It's the starting point. It's the starting pistol as we go into negotiations. And I think we're showing maturity and political responsibility with this. I would like to thank co-rapporteur Sigrid Muresan for the balance that we've been able to achieve. It wasn't always easy. I'd like to thank the shadow rapporteurs too, particularly those who were fighting day in, day out for European values and principles. We are now in a good position to start our work in this House. We're showing responsibility, maturity, commitment to Europe and commitment to the citizens. Let's roll up our sleeves and get on with the job to defend democracy and to defend the spirit of the European Union. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, we are closing the debates on this point in agenda, and I would remind you that what will take place today.